BYP Black Network Leaders April event. A few housekeeping points before we kick off. Please keep yourselves muted so as not to disturb the conversation with background noise. The event will be recorded and made accessible on the BYP network site, so you can hopefully review it and share it with your friends and colleagues. And lastly, if you have any questions, please type them into the chat box, and then I'm going to call on you to ask the question yourselves. This month's topic is creating small changes for ripple industry effect. What do we mean by this? Often corporate networks are set up with good intentions and grand ambitions. And of course, there's nothing wrong with wanting to aim high and take on the world. However, it's important as network leaders, we have a clear picture of what's reasonable to aspire towards, given the time constraints, the level of experience, access to resources, and senior level buy-in. In this session, you're going to hear from two individuals with first-hand case studies and practical strategies that will give you a really good idea as to how to uncover the challenges, but also generate successes and implement change in the process. We've got Josh Graham, a senior manager at Deloitte, and David Bew, head of executive search at PwC. Josh, David, welcome. How are you both?
Sun shining, and I've got a nice cup of coffee in my hand. I couldn't be better, and I'm in company with you guys. So yeah, I'm looking forward to the evening.
Good to hear. So can you please tell us a bit more about yourselves and what's your involvement in Black Networks been over the last period of time? David, why don't you start, and then Josh, you can go next.
Yeah, good question. Honestly, Josh has actually got more experience than me because he also wears the hat in Deloitte in the Black Network there. But in terms of this network that we've just launched in the last week and soft launch, and we're going to be making some more announcements about over the coming months. The Black Professional Services Collective is an interesting one because it was founded by people who would typically be competitors in normal market conditions, right? So we are coming together as an independent network made up of guys across 6-7 different firms who compete in the market. But what anchored us together is that we all were living and seeing challenges in the market in the same way, but we also had a joint belief that there's enough acumen amongst us to help fix the issue and get to a better resolution. So
were you doing something already at the firm you work for, or was it set up with the view to plugging into something larger from the outset?
I guess the first catalyst for us getting together was in the Big Four. We decided that we were going to do a joint venture to host a Black History Month event in October last year. And that was well attended. I think we had close to 700 people. We were able to really engage with the audience that night. And on the back of that, we said, well, hold on, guys.
Yeah.
We've got momentum here. How do we keep this going?
Okay. And how about you, Josh? What's your involvement in Black Networks been? And please give us some background as to who you are and
Sure.
what you do as well.
So Josh Graham, so I'm a senior manager at Deloitte. I actually started there as a grad, so I've been sort of a one firm person, been there for quite a while. So as sort of David alluded to, I'm the co-chair of the Deloitte Black Network. We actually established properly as a network last year, so last October. But I think unofficially we pretty much were set up sort of as a kind of grassroots movement off the back of one of the BYP events, actually. So I think it was the leadership conference in 2019.
I can feel Kike smiling somewhere.
Yeah. Here's a burning somewhere. So we, off the back of that event, I think, and it sounds silly given that I've been at Deloitte for nearly 10 years, but during that event, we were like, I've never seen that many Black people from Deloitte. I didn't know we had that many, and there wasn't that many at the event. But taking that and taking sort of the enthusiasm that everyone had just to see each other, that then became, just simple, just a WhatsApp group, but continuous events, all unofficial, all sort of just done as a kind of ad hoc sort of movement. And then as we sort of got into near October last year, and I think with everything that happened around, all the firms' responses and reactions to the Black Lives Matter movements and protests, we realized that actually we could establish ourselves correctly within Deloitte, and that's how the Deloitte Black Network came about, was saying, well, we exist, we've been functioning effectively as a network for the past year. Let's put some clout and some governance around it, but also let's get some budget and be a bit more official. And so that's sort of been, I'd like to say my day job, but I also do have other things to do.
I'm really intrigued by that, because I think when people think of setting up a network, they're thinking of something more formal, more sort of convoluted from the beginning.
Yeah.
But this is really started really organically. So what were the details of how you actually got going? How did you put the word out? What did you do for that first event, which started the journey?
So it's a good question. So I think the first, we kind of initially just, and again, this was, I'd love to say it was more official, more high tech. It literally was a WhatsApp group, but it started with those that attended. We sort of just sent a link out to be able to join the group, to everyone that was in that invite. And then it was mostly through word of mouth. So it would be, I'd just message everyone that I knew that was Black, being like, oh, we've just set up this group, do you want to join? Or just adding people as and when. I think some of our colleagues, members were a bit more, I'd like to say, proactive in terms of actually, if they just spotted someone Black in the office, they'd walk up and just be like, oh, by the way, we've got a group. So I think if the person who did that is listening, they'll know. So it was very much just through word of mouth. It grew relatively slowly to begin with. So I'd say, a couple of months with, to go from 50 to 100. And I think we got to about 300 and something within the year. And then the first event, again, was just two of us sort of kind of initially started the group, and actually Richard, who's the co-chair of the Plan Network, we just decided, let's do drinks on a certain Friday, send a message out to everyone. Again, there was no promise of, we made it very clear, this is not a network, so we don't have any budget, but
yeah,
we want to catch up on a Friday. We'll go somewhere with better music and less corporate, right? Because I think at Deloitte you're used to kind of the corporate events, and just a ton of people turned up. And then we basically just went, right, who wants to organize the next one? And people were just throwing in ideas. And again, I think to your point, it's very organic and zero governance whatsoever, at least for the first 8, 9, 10 months.
That's brilliant. That really epitomizes sort of what this session is about today. It's a relatively small action which has created this ripple effect, which looks as though it's sustaining itself. And for you, David, with your first event, how did that come about, out of interest? I suppose it was the larger, sorry, after you.
Yeah. So the first event that we had, because we had at PwC Multicultural Business Network, and I hadn't been to as many of those. I'd been to events internally that had been hosted by other networks and other sort of groups in this space. The first proper network or event that I was involved in was the Black History Month event, and it was so good to see how much hard work and dedication went into it. I mean, I was in Ghana when I was recording my content for the event to be done. I leveraged people in my team, in my day job, to say, look, can you give some support if you got spare capacity? We had people who were all over the world, but they were committed to making sure we got the thing out there on time and looking clean and sharp, and everyone just came together. It's back to the point of, what's the purpose of what you're trying to achieve?
Yeah.
Are you trying to just do something for the sake of some headlines, or are you trying to institute change and build something that
and how many people are you referring to when you say people came together?
Sure. So it was about 5 per Big 4 firm. Okay. So we had a working group of about 19, 20 of us in total. We had partner directors involved, just providing some guidance and oversight, but the heavy lifting was, all of us. Everyone had to do their own piece. we broke down the tasks to say, okay, you guys, you own, content production, you guys own liaising with the partners at each of the 4 firms to make sure they're on point with what they're presenting. And it just organically grew. There was no playbook. Nobody said this is how you do it. It was just like, this probably makes sense to do. Someone own that and do it.
So with my next question, and I've been thinking about the answer and I can't quite work out whether it's sort of easier or harder. So, working for the firms you do, large institutions, does it make it easier or harder to run a network? Because on one side, you've got these huge organizations and there's potentially lots of bureaucracy and layers to go through. But then on the flip side, I would presume there's lots of money to spend. You've got people who are very strategically minded and it's high profile. So there'll be an intention to do something. In reality, what's the experience like? Josh, why don't you kick us off on this one?
It's a good question. And I think I would have said it's both, which you've kind of alluded to. I think ultimately I'd say it's easier being in a larger firm in terms of the level of impact you can make. You just have to be aware of more things. And I suppose the more things are to the point you made around the kind of bureaucracy and who needs to sign off what to get what done. But at the same time, that level of risk of, because you work for such a big firm, you are always under watch from your own company, from competitors, from the press. So actually there's a level of sort of brand protection you need to be taken into account with whatever you're doing. And that's not to say you don't do things. If anything, it just forces you to make sure you're doing them right, and that you're doing them well. Which is why I think it's easier, because if that's the downside, being you're forced to be better, I don't really think that's terrible. But actually, to what you can allude to there, with you do then have greater budget, you do then have the clout of the organization. You have a lot of networks will struggle if they don't have a critical mass of members as well. So actually having a larger firm where there's more people means you can do more with more, be it people who help you run the organization, but also if you're able to look at a firm and say there are 4, 5, 6, 700 people that want X, Y, Z, that's a much more compelling argument than a small firm going, we've got 4 people that are requesting something, and that will not necessarily fall on deaf ears, but it doesn't loosen the purse strings as easily.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And on that,
to you, David, same question.
Yeah, sure. On that point, people are more likely to listen to what you have to say when you have a relationship with a brand that has fairly robust reputational currency. If it was frankly just me, David, speaking, and I didn't sit under one of these big houses as an employee, would it have the same impact? Would I have the same network to leverage? Simple answer is no. But with that exposure and platform, you also, as Josh said, have the responsibility to, whilst you want to have challenging conversations and be direct and tackle the big issues, you've got to box clever and you've got to be tactful and make sure you're doing it in the right way, so that you are ultimately, as an employee, representing the firm that you work for in the right way, that isn't gonna bring them into disrepute or anything like that. And that's not what you're trying to ever do as a network leader. It's more about how do we have productive conversations, tackle the big issues. Some of the conversations you'll have internally will differ to what you're able to say in a public domain. But I think if we're tactful and respectful, you're more likely to bring others along with you than to create friction, which is what we're trying to do, bring people along.
Yeah, there's some really important words in what you've just said, and I want to unpackage some of them. But before we do, Natalie's asked a question on the chat. Natalie, if you're there, can you unmute and ask your question, please?
Question based on what Josh said about his network growing organically, and that it was about contacting fellow Black people and saying, would you be interested in joining the network? And then you said, I think you said it has now become an official network.
Mhm.
And therefore, now that it is an official network, are you now inviting allies to join? And how has that kind of changed the dynamics that you have potentially now other
Yeah.
members involved?
Thanks,
I think,
Natalie.
yeah, it's a really good question, and it's something we did ponder on a lot when we started to think about kind of making it, or getting it set up as an official network. And part of that question was, what's the firm's policy on it? Which I wouldn't say force the hand, but they wouldn't really let us have one that's that exclusive. So the way we've seen it is the wider network. Yes, we've brought in allies, and I think they're hugely important. There are some that have joined that have been instrumental in some of the changes we've made within our organization, and I think they're hugely valuable to have. The WhatsApp group itself is still pretty much, unless I'm missing someone, but I can't really look through all 300 odd people, it's pretty much exclusively Black. And so I think the dynamic there is everyone understands the need for allies and engaging with them on sort of the more official events, but there is still a safe space for people to talk without worrying about who's watching. And we've just had to make a very clear distinction that the WhatsApp group is not work related. So it just means that there isn't that worry about, if I say something when I get in trouble, this is purely effectively us as 350 friends having a discussion, and then the actual network itself in terms of any official events we run, that is then we have had allies within those.
Just as a really sort of pragmatic question, large WhatsApp groups, they're a headache, they're a nightmare. So how much policing, or you've used this word governance a few times, because you don't want to be that guy, but someone has to be that person to ensure that the wrong thing's not said, and you bring somebody into disrepute.
It's usually me, but it's not too hard to be that guy. Because we've got effectively a committee that's running our actual sort of Black network, which is myself and I really wish I knew the number off the top of my head, but I'd say about 12 colleagues. I think between all of us, because we're in this WhatsApp group, it's quite easy to keep behaviors in check. And because everyone works at the same firm, I think everyone fundamentally has an understanding of, we don't want to bring risk on the firm or onto themselves. So luckily it's been easier, I think, probably because we all work at the same organization, minus some who have now left, but the whole point being they're still kind of part of like an alumni, let's say. But I think between a few of us just occasionally going, oh, let's just pop that on Teams, or pop that in an email out in work, it's sort of just everyone goes, oh, okay, yeah, good point. And then so it's not been too bad. I have muted the chat because it's a lot of people, but it's not too bad.
Okay, that's useful to hear. And go back to yourself, David, you talked about this word responsibility, and I'm just keen to sort of unpackage that through sort of wanting to understand what can then a Black network achieve as an ideal within an organization. We always talk about wanting to create change, but let's say the change has been made. What does this new ideal look like in your opinion? And then as a second question, what's reasonable, what's practical? If this is where the ideal is, sort of given the resources individuals have, how then can you determine where you want to be on that scale?
I think in terms of what's practical, in terms of what is the focus of what we want to try and achieve, that really has to be centered and anchored on data. That's always been my philosophy. If we're ever gonna do something, we need to be able to weigh and measure it. We need to be able to have a point in time where we say, okay, by this time, we want to check in and see how things are going, so that we know how things are progressing. So in my world, it's partner recruitment that I'm responsible for. When you're assessing people's leadership skills and their ability as a partner, or even just any member of staff, you're wanting to understand what their personal development plan is. What are the things that we know what you're great at, and that's fantastic. What are the things that you need to evolve to get better? And we're effectively saying, well, how do we work with industry, with organizations, to say, what's your personal development plan or institutional development plan? Have you identified it? What are you doing to work on it, and how are you measuring performance against that? And I think taking a data-led approach is the best way, because we recognize that we want that from our people, and therefore I think it makes sense for institutions to have a development plan. Is something that they should be familiar with.
And I agree with you. But playing devil's advocate here, if we're talking generically as well. So if it's data driven, but let's say you've got a network which has been set up relatively informally, it's in its early stages, is it in a position to have that data to determine whether it's being successful or not, and sort of what data in fact will help to determine if it's working or not working?
Yeah, we won't build Rome in a day. So everything that we need to achieve to make change is going to take time to build trust, time to build relationships so that both parties are influencing each other. We will learn what the institutions don't think is possible, and we'll try and meet in the middle ground to say, well, actually, we think these things really can make change, and we'll continue to measure them so that it doesn't just become a flashpoint a year after George Floyd, and then we sort of forget about it in the years to come. But by using data, sticking back with that personal development plan, how did you do this year? How did you do next year? And keeping on the spotlight to say, well, let's weigh and measure success. That's how you have to do it. There is no such weighing and measuring of success that happens at a macro level across most firms at present time. And without it being measured, there's, I guess, less pressure to really move things forward. So these are the kind of conversations we want to have in a tactful way with institutions.
Indeed. And same question for you, Josh. What does the ideal look like, and what's reasonable for a network to aspire towards in that context?
Yeah, that's a good, it is a really good question. I think when it comes to especially networks within organizations, I think the focus should be on the members. And I appreciate that sounds sort of obvious, but what I mean there is, if you are looking at what's a reasonable thing for a network to influence, if it's something that's around supporting the members of that network, that's fair game, because there's, you will need things to do it, but it makes sense as a remit. If it's something that is impacting policy, that's when you'll struggle. So if I think about, within an organization, the focus of the network is, right, okay, well, do we want to have listening sessions so people can kind of get things off their chests and, help with that sort of kind of catharsis, for example? Let's try and run a mentoring scheme, for example. Let's help with recruitment, so supporting people, bringing people that they know and helping them with interviews. So again, it's very kind of people focused, and it's all around support. I think the point, and actually to the point around around getting data, and I suppose of anything else that maybe is how do you put the resources in place to execute what you think a network needs or wants to achieve? It's effectively kind of putting a stake in the ground, kind of saying this is what we are going to do. And if it is look, we as an organizer, we as a network will run this, or run mentoring, we will support our colleagues, we will provide them with speaking opportunities at other events. That's something then is agreed with the organization to say, we're going to do all of these things. And then the ask is, to do that, we need to know, we need this data, we need this funding, we need a voice in this room. And it's very much without having that very clear accountability and making it clear what the network is going to achieve, it's then hard to get that, because you sort of need given your main stakeholder is the organization you sit in, you need their support and their resources or their inputs to execute on that. So I think it's anything that's around supporting your members is, I'd say, fair game.
Yeah, I really like that point.
They sit on it. Yeah,
I really like that point. If I try and sort of coin it, you can either try and focus on the people or the policy.
Yeah,
and policy is harder but not impossible. But it's just got me thinking then, how can a network have more influence over the policy? I'm assuming that through its people-focused approach, it's able to collate opinions which are not disparate now, but they are validated by a critical number of people feeling that way. And maybe it sort of creates a channel into HR or creates a channel into someone in the C-suite who then can initiate the change to affect policy.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And we're able to say, this is what the market, with respect to the Black population in the industry, are telling us. And sometimes they might not necessarily feel comfortable or safe saying it internally, but the data is clearly saying there's a critical mass of people saying the exact same thing. 70% of the people who were surveyed have told us X. Therefore, we should probably have a conversation about this, because this is what the data is leading us to. And we can feed that back to the people who are responsible for driving change in this area, so that we're connecting them to information and thinking that they might not necessarily have access to. And part of that reason is because we are still on a journey of, even within the people teams, improving diversity of representation in those areas, which will in turn have a knock-on effect on the quality of conversations that happen around D&I.
Yeah, I would really agree with that. And just to sort of flip it on its head then, on the other side, sort of focusing on the members or the people, it doesn't necessarily need to be as, again, formal or as convoluted as some might think to begin with, at least. I mean, I imagine at least doing something like the event you did, Josh, to begin with, or Black History Month, has an effect on people's level of engagement within the organization. So if we're going back to data, I'm assuming that if there was an engagement survey, an employee engagement survey, in some way, shape or form, it's reflected in there. It positively impacts that data.
Absolutely.
Definitely agree.
What, just on the data point, are there any other sort of data points that come up or have featured in any conversations at all that help to shape the D&I conversation? If not, then
so I think data is, and I suppose just for context, so I'm also quite heavily involved in Deloitte's Black Action Plan. So most firms had some sort of response to sort of the George Floyd murder and the Black Lives Matter movement last year. Most committed to making change, and so I'm quite close to ours. So I kind of co-wrote it and now sit on the steering group. And so I think when it comes to data, it's less around, the discussion I find is less around what data is needed. Well, that is part of it. It's actually just what data is available. Okay. And the reason I say that is I very much doubt any organization, if you said we need a list of all the Black people, they'd legally be allowed to provide it. Even internally within, even to the head partners, we've had, CEO of Deloitte asking for it, and HR will still say no. So I think there's that tends to be the challenge, if anything, around actually what data is available, and you almost can't change that. So you end up having
as I understand
how you work around it.
Yeah, as I understand it, you can't ask for it, or you can't record it yourself, but people can self-identify, so you can have certain milestones in a process.
Yeah, you can't ask for it if it wasn't collected with that purpose in the first place. So if you applied to a firm and they said, and it said on the form or the application, what is your ethnicity? We will use this to identify you for initiatives in the future, then fine. The firm could share that with me running a mentoring scheme. If it doesn't say that, then that data, I'm not allowed to access that for effectively the purpose it wasn't collected for. And so, yeah, so I suppose a long-winded route down GDPR, but
it's good to know. This is the detail people need.
Yeah, it's a challenge that you will definitely face, and therefore the productive conversations you have with people at HR and usually legal and risk as well are, okay, what can I get access to? And then that's what you basically go, okay, this is what I've been given. What can I do with it? And your answers are either work with it and just see where you can get to. So you might have aggregated percentage Black people in a department, as long as there's enough people in that department. Or you go, right, okay, well, we need to find our own data. What can we do as a method of, understanding our people better because the firm doesn't know?
Yeah. Okay, thank you for that. That's really useful technical information in there. Just want to focus on you two for a moment as individuals.
Mhm.
I'm intrigued to sort of get a better understanding of what sort of people are best suited to the role of running a Black corporate network. What are the key traits? Because in some business, or any network, in fact, doesn't have to be a Black corporate network.
Yeah.
In some businesses, the default option is the most senior woman or the most senior person who identifies as LGBTQ plus, or the most senior Black person. They may not necessarily be suited to the task.
Mhm.
And it's interesting knowing you both as briefly as I have done. You both are obviously very suited, but you're both very different to each other too. So I'm just trying to explore this.
It's a good question. Seniority doesn't always dictate the ability to run a network, because again, responsibilities become different the more senior you get. And again, if I'm talking at a macro level in our industry, professional services, actually, what does senior mean? As a headhunter, so I do a lot of senior hiring. That's such a huge spectrum in terms of the definition of senior. And then if you look at in the staffing grades, director is the most senior staffing grade in our industry. For some people, that's senior.
Yeah.
But then entry-level partner is junior on a long list of different partner gradings. So is a junior partner senior, or is a senior partner, you know? So the more senior you get up that ladder, you've got far more considerations and even more consideration around what you can and can't say in the public domain, because everyone's going to be like, John Smith said X and he's a partner at this person. You know, you have less latitude to speak on things. And when we spoke earlier, you talked about, or rather we talked about, the ability for senior people to engage in D&I topics is something that I've had a lot of people talk to me about. Why doesn't this partner say this or that partner speak up as much as this member of staff? And I think the way you put it was, we're all different members of the military, but some people sit in the Navy, some in the Air Force, and some in the Army. And that actually led me to reflect and think, actually, yeah, that there are things that I can challenge on that a partner can't, but we're all sort of tackling the same issue in different ways and with different methods. So I don't think seniority is essential. You need to have judgment as to how do I influence the senior stakeholders and the people who drive the rhythm of the industry I work in. You need to be able to be on top of your emotions. You can't come from a place of anger. You can't have too much passion in these conversations either. It really needs to be very measured, almost leave the emotion at the door to some extent and say, let's go through the facts and operate in a way that the environment I work in operates day to day, and be very cool and collected. And you have to be humble. There are many times I've thought, let's do this, and you know, the leadership team would in our network would challenge me and say, actually, we think that's the wrong way to do it. And you have to take that on board and say, actually.
Do you think you've got to be tenacious and fight every point that comes up, or fight's the wrong word, challenge every point that comes up, or do you find it's give and take and playing a long game?
It depends. What are you trying to do? Are you trying to point score? Are you trying to win battles, or are you trying to think bigger picture? And sometimes you have to take an L on things, as they say, and recognize that actually, for where I'm trying to get to, this is a better route to travel, because I might win this one, but I've now got this list of people who are thinking, okay, we'll get you next time, and then you undermine your mission.
Indeed. And same question to you, Josh.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the focus shouldn't just be on the leader, but on the whole team. So I think as long as you've got those skill sets across the entire team that's sort of working or leading this network, then you're usually in a good position. So even if you do have the one that is super passionate, really empathetic, understands what the people want, makes it sound like you're selling something, but that then, if those skill sets and that vision and awareness within the team, then that's great. I think as a leader, you do have to be that bit more pragmatic because you're trying to operate within an organization. You know, you're operating within an environment that you don't have full control over. I don't think you need to be senior, but I do think there's value in having a senior stakeholder who's bought into what you're trying to achieve. So you could be the most junior person, you know, you could be the most junior level in your organization, but if you've got someone that's got your ear, or so you've got someone's ear and you can say, I'm thinking we should do this, can you raise that in XYZ meeting? Then that's the same as if you were doing it. So I think it is that pragmatism, it is that ability to sort of say, right, actually, what is it we're trying to achieve and what's the best way to do that within, you know, the organization. I think David said it earlier, box smart, you know, so don't fight every battle, but go, right, okay, well, these are the ones that will get me what we need. Take a concession here, take a concession here. But then having, maybe actually the main trait is having a good team and, you know, identifying what you need in your team, having the people with the great ideas, having the people who are, you know, great communicators and can keep a membership engaged, having those that will keep you honest and make sure that you don't go off track, or that, you know, make sure that you're clear in what you want to achieve. So yes, I think I'd put it on having a really strong team, because I know, for example, within Deloitte, we wouldn't do anything without the team that we have.
Yeah, you really sort of reimagined the question through the answer, and I want to come onto that. Just another thought that popped into my head. I suppose there is no sort of perfect or ideal. As an example, where you are a senior person, it's great that you've got maybe some impetus at the higher level, but then on the flip side, sometimes people are just not comfortable opening up to senior people. You can be the most affable person in the world, but people just see you and go and feel as though, you know, it's some kind of appraisal. But then on the flip side, where you have someone who's more junior, they can easily relate to people who are more junior, they can hear more, but then they don't necessarily have the same impetus at the senior level. So all of these points you're making, which are brilliant, are sort of leaning towards there isn't an ideal, it's a collaborative effort.
Precisely,
of different people involved in the process. So my next question then is what's the best way to collaborate in the context of running a network? How do you promote teamwork and get the best out of people? Sometimes there isn't a clear leader. It's a number of people who are maybe different in seniority in other roles, but in the context of this venture, they're equals. How do you manage that dynamic?
Yeah, so David mentioned something earlier around, you know, the difference between a director and a junior partner being one is technically the most senior they can be, and the other is technically the most junior you can be, for their kind of respective stages in career, let's say. I think the first bit is kind of leaving the grade at the door. So you did mention, you know, you could be, I'm a senior manager in my day job, but my role within the Black Network Committee isn't a senior manager. You know, I'm the co-chair, so it's whilst that is a senior role within the committee, you know, there are other members of the team who lead work streams, and then the people working for them are more senior than them on a day-to-day basis. But I think, first of all, just leaving that at the door and going, right, okay, well, we are now a team that is structured in the way we're structured, ignoring grades, pay, whatever. And then I think what I know what's worked for us is having that ownership with the people that are doing the work. So I'm not dictating, or my co-chair isn't dictating, this is how we're going to do communications, or this is the next event we're running. We might bring stuff up, but having the ownership going with, right, okay, well, those that are writing the comms will own that plan and drive that. And you know, we can have weekly meetings where they share their ideas, and you know, that's going to specific tools, but you know, there's a place where we can see all the content, so we can see how things are developing. But
it sounds like you're giving it structure, because without it, it's a bit of a rabble. I suppose where you've got experience in meetings outside of the network, you're bringing some of those.
Pretty much, yeah. I think we have. I suppose the fact that we're a consultant, well, I sit in our consulting business, means I've just approached it as I would a project or a program. But I think, yeah, that focuses on that autonomy amongst the teams, because that allows those that have either the better skill set and expertise, but also they're closer to the material, can work on things rather than sort of at a high level, me just spitballing stuff and hoping it works. But yeah, you do end up having to try and run it as a bit of a project or a program.
Yeah.
Okay.
And you've also got to consult So take on board other people's opinions, consult within your leadership team, consult with your mentors, consult with the people who you get counsel from. Explain, this is an issue that I'm trying to tackle. You've got a lot more experience than I do. How would you run this play? And leverage the strength of your network. They're going to be people who have more experience than you. Leverage them. There are a lot of people who are bought into the mission. And build your relationships. Seek counsel from people that you trust. And when you've got the same problem that you've discussed with 2-3 people maybe, and they're telling you the same consistent message, that's probably
it's a sign.
Exactly.
Even if you don't agree, the alarm is ringing.
Exactly.
Now, what really fascinates me about the pair of you is you've started doing something internal to your organizations, but you're now connecting your businesses with other businesses within your sector to do something, bigger and better. So can you just elaborate on that as well, please, in terms of, how do you do that? Sounds like a lot of work. It sounds like it needs a lot of collaboration. We're in a lockdown. How do you make these different cultures and business models and people in different locations all function as one?
Well, I think I was saying to you before we started the call, Josh and I were co-chairs of this network, but we've never met each other before.
How did you meet each other, in fact?
It was through the Black History Month event. It was all virtual. He was on the Deloitte team and I on the PwC side. So we'd all met on virtual calls, but never in person. So that's something in the diary now that lockdown is lifted. And technology has really helped. Technology has helped you engage people. We got people in Liverpool who were leading work streams for us, all the way in the north of the country, but technology has made that easier. And if I look at some of the generation above us, they didn't have these platforms to be able to connect with so many people as easily as we do. And look, I've observed Kike's approach as well. One of the things she talked about the BYP was we had to use technology to be able to scale. We need to use tech. And I was like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. We're going to record sessions so that even though there are X people on the night, more people can watch it after the fact, and you're amplifying the message. That's tech enablement. So we're leveraging tech in the right way too. But there's a reference as to how do we do it. It's really the team. People have put hard work and dedication and worked till silly o'clock at night, many nights. Our comms guys, our mentoring guys, our stakeholder engagement teams. Those are the people that do it. And it might be Josh and I that will appear on sessions like this. Those are the guys that make it happen.
Yeah, and same question for you, Josh.
Yeah. So I think there's, it's always going to be different when you have people working from different organizations. We have about 7 at least, within our team. So I think part of it is that putting a lot of it to the side and kind of going, right, okay, well, this is not a Deloitte project, so let me not bring my Deloitte. Well, I'll take that back. I won't force my Deloitte kind of views on this is how things should be running. But I think actually it ended up being a strength of going, well, here's what we do in this situation. Will that help? Or here's someone I know that does X, Y, Z. That's might be useful. So I think the team has been able to bring in the relevant expertise and where it's been hugely helpful. It has taken a while. There's always a bit of a culture clash that's just inherent with the situation that we're in. So I think it's, if I'm perfectly honest, we're still learning what's the best best approach, and we in a year's time we probably will still be learning about or improving. But I think the way we see it is we're bringing sort of the best from each organization, as opposed to being warring and conflicting organizations in this respect. And so by putting that all together, we can do more. And I think everything that we want to achieve, or that the individual networks have looked to achieve within the organizations, this is effectively the same, except the scale is larger. It's not an organization, it's an industry. But the challenges are the same. The need for managing stakeholders and having senior sort of friends, let's call them, is still the same. It's just slightly harder.
Indeed, yeah.
Organising meetings is just that bit more difficult. Not to sort of downplay the challenge within the face, but I think you need to approach it with that mindset as opposed to looking at it as this unsurmountable task and then and sort of being kind of, deer in headlights. It's going, right, okay, well, let's just take this as with a normal network. But then as we approach things, we'll realize the challenge of having it at an industry level, and we'll surmount it at that point. But that's sort of the approach, because I think, if I'm honest, I don't know any other way. we've run networks internally, so let's just do that.
Yeah, I think that's exciting, though. I think there'll be some people who are thinking about this and maybe think it's daunting because it's more work and it's difficult. But actually, if it were easy, everyone would be doing it. And it's a journey, isn't it? It's an adventure, and you're acquiring skills along the way and meeting people. And that's what I really love about operating in this space. Yeah. I'm just intrigued also, actually. I'm just wondering if there's anything you've noticed another business doing, you thought, I wouldn't mind doing that. That's a good idea. And if so, what was it?
So I know one. So David has mentioned. I think you have. I apologize if I forgot the name of it, but there's sort of like a kind of coffee corner or
the water cooler on Fridays.
Sorry, I've not been in an office for a year.
Yeah,
and
that's
a half.
right. That's right.
It looks like I've just got my tap from my sink. But yes, so the idea of just having a regular but informal get together. I just had the idea of it. So it's something that it's very simple, but it allows you to go, right, okay, well, I can attend this and I don't need to attend it. So yeah. It doesn't feel like a meeting, but it just feels like an opportunity for people to catch up, to chat, to kind of gossip and do the things you would do if you're in an office, but amongst, I guess, peers where you're likely to have more things in common.
Yeah.
So I think that was something that they mentioned. David mentioned it on a call once, and I was like, that's a good idea. I like that. It's simple.
It's a really good idea. We do something called the Chinwag Challenge, and you have to call someone you've not spoken to for a long time and just talk. You can't really talk about work. It just has to be 10, 15 minutes or something, because these are the conversations you'd be having in passing.
Precisely, yeah.
And phone someone because you need something particular, and then the call's done. So everything's become very transactional. So ideas like that are great for bonding.
Yeah.
You want to say something?
Yeah. I mean, to be honest, it's something that we've done new, and I was like, we should be telling the other guys this, because we've got some really cool partners who are just like from all over the place, from Trinidad and Tobago, from South Africa, from Ghana, and you hear their stories and you're like, wow, you have to go through that. I'm talking about in the personal life as well. And Friday sessions are where we could just all in Nigeria they call it gisting, for half an hour, and it usually happens before the advisory board meeting that I have with Josh and the others. So anytime I overrun, I'm like, you never guess what. all of that, and it builds morale, because you look around the screen, especially when you're doing it in the virtual one, you're like, how many black faces are on the screen? This is insane. We have people who are black who work in this department. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
And you start to realize, because otherwise you could be numbed. And actually, I tell you what, lockdown has been one of the best things that could have happened for us whilst this conversation has unfolded, because it allowed more people to be able to engage, because technology has made that easier. In the time where people might be on the train home from work, they can use some of that time to tune in. I mean, if I'd been going to the office, I'd be in my commute right now.
Yeah, well, in fact, in the past, I've asked the audience to ask a question, and I've had someone say, I can't do it because I'm on the bus. So it goes to show people are just listening, move and doing what works for them. On that note, we have a question here from Samir Fuda. If I've pronounced your name wrong, I apologize, but please, can you ask your question, or I will ask it for you?
Hi. No, it's Samaya, but it's okay. It's
Hi. Hello.
Hi, so nice to meet you all. I was
Hi.
just wondering what you consider to be some of your biggest accomplishments in your network, and how do you measure impact? I know it's less formal than, it's meant to be a bit less formal, so maybe measuring impact is too much of a metric, but how do you measure impact? Yeah.
Sure. I'll take that one on. You absolutely have to measure impact, otherwise what are you doing with your time, right? We are not at a point in our evolution or in our life cycle where we can measure the impact just yet. We're building the foundations, we're building them robustly, but the plan is we get to a point where we can measure impact, and that impact will be, well, how many people are there at senior manager grade, director grade in our industry? Because we know that those numbers are not as good as we'd like them to be, and you can measure impact there because you'll see an upward trajectory on the charts to see more representation within the industry who come from our community. When you see people saying in surveys a year on from when you started, actually, I will recommend this as a place to work, I am enjoying it more. That's how you measure the impact data. When you see D&I leaders or chief people officers that you're working with saying, actually, you helped us unlock this issue in a way we'd not even thought about before. We appreciate that. We appreciate the way you did it without us landing in the Daily Mail or anything like that. Thank you. That's how you measure impacts, and the continuity. So it's not just a quick and dirty and you're done, but the thing lasts over a period of time. But also the members will give you feedback. That's what we're asking of them. If we're not doing the job right, give us that feedback.
Yeah.
Thank you. And Josh, same question to you.
No, and Smart, really good question. So I think, again, it is hard, I suppose, to have quantifiable sort of measurements, but I'd say in terms of accomplishments, at least within the Deloitte Brand Network. So last year, I think we held 20 events over the course of Black History Month. And I'd say, for context, last year, the year before it was 3, the year before it was 1. And we had remarkable turnout, not just from our Black colleagues, but from people across the firm. So for me, that was impact, I'd say, measured was just the level of engagement and the level of awareness. People actually getting involved and asking and wanting to be involved, whether they are, have Black heritage, or, of Black heritage or not. And then I think what I would also say is just, we've almost embedded ourselves in the firm's culture a little bit, or at least in this sort of the zeitgeist for the meantime of, I get emails being like, well, we're looking at doing this. Does that look right? And they're sort of asking from like a race perspective. I had someone ask whether I forgot what materials we were sending out, but they asked whether it seemed a bit too over the top because every single stock image was of a Black person. But even just the idea of this is now something that they're thinking of. They're not just doing it and being like, oh, whatever. They're going, well, actually, I need to consider whether this makes sense. Let me ask someone in the Black network. So I think it's people feel more engaged, even just looking at the amount of questions that we see in both the WhatsApp group and then we use Microsoft Teams at Deloitte, so on the Teams channel for the Black network as well. I know that sounds silly, but that's a question they can ask a Black population that they couldn't do before. So the fact that you now have people going, oh, I need someone to help me with this, and they'll come to this network first. Or, oh, actually, my friend set up a website that shows you Black-owned businesses. Check it out. It's starting to really help a community build and a community communicate and share, inquire, and celebrate together. So I think for me, that's what I see as sort of, at least within our, very not even a year old. Officially, but I think for me those are the kind of main accomplishments, because it's, whilst not quantifiable, they're tangible, and you can see that their experience at the firm is now better for it. And I think for me that's kind of all I'd be asking for, really.
I think that's
your question.
Thank you. Yes, yes.
I think that's a great question. I think that's a great set of answers too. And clearly there's a spectrum of measures people can use to determine whether something's been impactful. The one that really resonates for me beyond you know, all the data and the stats is when someone pulls you to one side and wants to talk maybe about an event or something that was said at an event, and it turns into a heart to heart. They really sort of get into something personal about their upbringing or an experience they had. And I love that. I love to think that's something I was involved with, created that level of emotion in them, which hopefully, you know, should have some lasting effect on how they engage with others around them, which then has the ripple effect we're talking about today. I'm sure, you know, you've all had experiences like that, and sometimes they're quite unintended. It's not what you're expecting. How's that happened sort of during lockdown? Does that still happen? Do people pick up the phone? Do they?
Yeah, so we use Google Chats, and you'll get off a call, and we might, so on the water cooler sessions that we have, I've spoken, and someone will send you a message saying, this is a great initiative, this is brilliant, I'm so glad there's someone that is trying to push this forward, and there are people that are trying to drive this forward, and you're like, okay, that's a bit of reassurance that we're on track, we're doing the right thing. I think the piece I'm also interested in, and what this network will be focused on, is how do we also help the people that are, you know, coming through, don't have a clue what options are available to them. You know, I know there'll be many students who have a lot of potential. There's a kid that I've been speaking with who is the first person in his family to go to university, and he's going to Oxford to read PPE, philosophy, politics, and economics, probably one of the most prestigious degrees in the world at Oxford. And I'm like, okay, that's a lot of potential. How do we make sure he knows what his options are, so that he's making the right place? Because he might not have someone who works in a professional service giving him counsel. So how do we say, look, you might want to go into banking, you might want to go into legal, but you could also come in and do a number of those things here within professional services. We'll help guide you whatever decision you want to make. And, you know, leveraging the power of networks is so important. When I think about some of my friends that I went to school with, I see the Jewish community do it fantastically well. They're so very good at networking amongst themselves and championing their community, and providing opportunities and mentorship. A lot of that is done via the synagogue setup.
It's so powerful because when someone has it explained to them, or they see someone in a position, it validates it's possible, and that really resonates with the individual. I'm just really conscious of time. Same question for you, Josh. I just wondered whether, you know, you've had a few moments with people where they've you know, shared some experiences off the back of your events, and how that's resonated.
Yeah, it's been wide ranging as well. So I've had you know, we had a text once after one of the events from someone who actually left, but the event was open to anyone, saying, I wouldn't have left the firm if this was in place when I was there. You know, we've had people reach out and just ask for advice. They go, well, you seem to be in a sensible or a good position within the organization. I need advice on X, Y, Z, and you know, you can kind of happily talk through. The one that interests me is I've had one or two partners phone me, white partners, and sort of say, I didn't realize this, you know, or I didn't, if depending on what the session was, either kind of go, I didn't realize these issues were existed within the firm, or people felt this, you know, suffered this within the UK, or this was a fantastic event. I love what you did, and I'm learning something that's new. How can I help? And both finished with, how can I help? So it's been a mix of who's reached out, but there's definitely been interest building, and people do definitely sort of, whether it's a you know, something on instant message or a text or a phone call.
That's fantastic. It's really good to hear, and no doubt it really makes it worthwhile knowing you've had left that impression with someone who's then again gonna have a knock-on effect to the people around them. Final questions at the close. I'm just keen for you each to leave our audience today with one final thought on sort of anything you want to cover that you think is important to have an impact, to sort of create small changes for ripple effects. Maybe something which we didn't get a chance to really cover today in any detail. Why don't we spend 30 seconds to a minute finishing on that note? David?
For me is, don't underestimate the power and influence you have when you get involved and when you engage. You know, you might not think you do, but believe me, when you congregate and you go with numbers, your small input has a huge impact. You know, we saw that in the state of Georgia this year, where a lady called Stacey Abrams mobilized Black voters there, and for the first time, you know, deep South state like Georgia turned blue for the first time since 1992, and that's because she allowed people to realize your small vote, when you multiply it by X, that can do some really big things. So don't think that your impact is minimal. It's huge. Get involved, collaborate, leverage the strength of your network, and contribute in any way you can to that network and that mission.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. And same question for you, Josh.
Yeah, I think mine on the similar note around not underestimating, but I think it's around, given I've sort of said your network should be around your people. So take any win as a win. If one person comes out there saying, I feel so much better having been part of this network, as far as I'm concerned, that should be considered a network success, right? The more you can achieve, great, but start small, kind of, you know, celebrate the wins, however small they are to start off with, because you need to get that first step before you start running, and sort of build on from there. So I think it is just, you know, cherish the times where you know you made a difference, and don't worry too much about completely changing your organization on the first day. You know, that will come.
That's brilliant. That's such a wonderful point, as was yours, David. I'm sad to finish the session now. I've learned so much. I've only known the pair of you for a short period of time, but I look forward to knowing you going forward. For anyone who wants to learn more or hear more about what Josh and David are doing, by all means, reach out on LinkedIn. Just bear in mind they're both busy people, so if they don't get back to you immediately, then you know it's not personal. In fact, it's exactly how you and I met, David. You reached out, and here we are now. So you know, we really do make the time because we're all very passionate about this topic. And please, you know, check out the recording online. There's lots of other recordings for other sessions the BYP are doing. There's so much information and material that can help us to achieve the things we're aspiring towards. So again, Josh, David, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. The audience appreciates it. Looking at the chat here now.